Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update for the 16th of May 2025. I know I'm doing a lot of these at the moment. It's because it's a very dynamic situation whereby all the nations appear to be involved in these negotiations in one way or another. Now, it appears that the negotiations in Istanbul have come to a close between Ukraine and Russia, although there are claims that they're just pausing. So, first of all, we heard that the Ukraine-Russia peace talks in Istanbul ended less than 2 hours after starting, according to Sky News, citing unnamed source from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. So that's not a good sign that things are going to be generally, well thought through and hammered out. Then we're hearing that Ukraine-Russia talks in Istanbul have been paused, not ended, after Moscow demanded Ukraine withdraw its forces from the partially occupied Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Sources in the Ukrainian delegation told Novini Live. And let's just talk in generalities at the beginning before we go into some details. From a pro-Ukrainian point of view, my point of view, my personal speculative point of view would be that what you want from Russia in order for Ukraine to get the most out of this is to demand completely unrealistic things. If Russia come into these talks and say have totally unrealistic expectations of what the outcomes should be, of what should take place, then actually that plays into Ukraine's hands, because they can then turn around to the US and say, look, they're clearly not interested in peace. There's no serious demands here. These are crossing all the red lines. And of course, we are not going to accept that. And there is potentially this taking place. So it looks like the Russians have overplayed their hand. And that, I think, is good for Ukraine. What Ukraine wouldn't want is if Russia slightly overplayed their hand, but enough to just dangle something of a carrot that is good enough for Trump. The question is, are these completely unrealistic things that are completely unrealistic to you and I, Zelensky and the Ukrainians? Are they unrealistic to Trump? Would he look at these things and go, well, yeah, that's absolutely fine? And that's where the conversation is going to be as far as I'm concerned. What you want is, for me as a pro-Ukrainian, I want the United States particularly to say, this is ridiculous, we need to sanction Russia. And then Europe to go, thank you very much, we'll join in with that. It seems to be being led, the response to be led by the Americans. And what you want is Trump to say, that's ridiculous, Putin, it's never going to happen, right, I'm getting annoyed with this is taking too long. Worst case scenario is Trump's like, oh, maybe, okay, let's wait for another round of talks in 2 to 3 weeks' time. In the meantime, Russia keeps doing what they're doing now. And there's no serious attempt at a ceasefire, and there are no ramifications for not having a ceasefire. That is the worst of all worlds, and that's exactly what Russia wants. So the simple question is, have Russia overplayed their hand here in what they're demanding? Okay, now let's go and look at in some more finer detail. Interesting that the Ukrainians have been quite wily here in demanding a translator and demanding that they don't, they refuse to speak in Russian, even though all of them can. In fact, Russian is Zelensky's first language, for example. All of the delegates can speak fluent Russian, but demanding that they speak in Ukrainian through a translator, I think that's a bit of a power play going on there. And hats off to them for that. Now, Rustem Umerov, the defense minister, said all ceasefire modalities have been discussed. Details will come out soon. Zelensky-Putin meeting is being considered. We're working on it. There's a possible 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap imminent. Date is unknown, but we're going to keep it a secret. And new talks will be announced soon. So there's your positive outlook of like, okay, that all sounds good. Right. How do we all feel about that? But we'll come to some of the more challenging details in a second. Now, Russia's response so far, and of course, by the time you watch this, things already would have changed to some degree, or more details would have come out. Russian delegation leader Medinsky has made some key statements. Quote, we have taken note of the request for a meeting between the leaders of Russia and Ukraine. That's kind of what Umerov just said. The negotiations have concluded, and we are generally satisfied. So no pause, they are actually concluded. Russia and Ukraine will soon carry out a prisoner exchange based on 1,000 formula. Both sides will present their vision of a potential ceasefire detail in detail, and negotiations will continue afterward. Okay, that's the key point there. All the other stuff is, yeah, brilliant, prisoner swap, excellent, further meetings, yada, yada, yada. Okay, what we want to know about is this potential ceasefire, because if it is an unrealistic demand or agreement for ceasefire, yeah, if what the Russians expect is ridiculous, then actually that should be the green light for Trump to turn on sanctions. Now, Russia and Ukraine, says Max24, according to Medinsky again, Russia and Ukraine have agreed to detail their proposals for establishing that ceasefire and are ready to extend the contract. So what that last statement means, I'm not 100% sure. The Economist reports, and we're going to hear a little bit from The Economist because there are some pretty significant controversies, I think. To illustrate the tone of the negotiations, The Economist reports that Medinsky said, "We don't want war, but we are ready to fight for a year, 2, 3, as long as it takes. We fought with Sweden for 21 years. How long are you ready to fight?" Now, that's the sort of comment that should be used against Russia. If I was Zelensky, I'd be taking that to Trump and saying, look, these guys are not interested in peace. They are ready to fight for 21 years. What do you say about this, Trump? It's all about convincing Trump. You don't need to convince the European leaders. They're ready to put sanctions on, but they just need that green light from the US. There still is this dependence on the United States, frustratingly. Okay, let's just accept that that's the case and that Europe are weak and they are not going to stand up to Russia without the US's say-so. So therefore, we need the US's say-so. So therefore, we need to convince Trump, as Zelensky said, and that's what I reported this morning, Zelensky recognizes that we need to convince Trump that Putin is stringing him along. That is a comment, that is a quote there from Medinsky that should go at least some way towards that kind of position, that Russia is stringing them along. Now, here's where it gets controversial from what the Russians have demanded. During the Istanbul talks, a Ukrainian delegation reportedly refused, says Noel reports, to withdraw troops from partially occupied territories. So in other words, territories that Ukraine owns, has sovereign control over, and one would assume those are the four aforementioned, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, that they kind of have to withdraw from all of those regions. And apparently, in response to that refusal to do so, Russian delegates allegedly stood up and warned next time it will be 5 regions, referring to Dnipropetrovsk. And there is this threat that if you don't agree to what we're talking about now, then the next time we have talks, we are going to have a toehold in Dnipropetrovsk. That is what I think one of the main objectives is for the activity along the Eastern Front at the moment. One of the objectives is to get just into Dnipropetrovsk, and then they can say, right, we've written that into our constitution. Now you need to get rid out of all 5 regions, including Crimea. Crimea is, been and gone as far as the Russians are concerned. Right, what do we have here? War Translated says, in Istanbul, Russia demanded the Ukrainian forces withdraw from territories it did not capture by military means, calling it a precondition for a ceasefire, referring to those areas as, quote, its own. Now, this is, I think, this should be overplaying their hand. This should, if Trump knows enough about the geography of Ukraine and really the history of Ukraine and the fact that, you can't invade a country, control some of their territories and say, right, that means we control all of these territories. And even the idea that Crimea should be Russian, I mean, that should be soundly and roundly challenged, right? Okay, Oliver Carroll says there's more. A well-placed source tells me, and he's a journalist, a very good journalist with The Economist, who has been covering Russia and Ukraine a lot. There's more. A well-placed source tells me Russia said it would agree to a ceasefire only if Ukraine withdraws from the 4 annexed provinces Russia doesn't even fully control. Moscow also threatened to seize 2 more, Kharkiv and Sumy. So not only do we have the 4 regions that have been previously mentioned, the threat of a 5th in Dnipropetrovsk. If next time we talk, there'll be a fifth one added. But also they've made threats over Kharkiv and Sumy in the north of Ukraine. Here we have, The Economist. Russia also threatened to seize Kharkiv during the negotiations. And then we have MP Honcharenko, who is somewhat controversial. Always take what he says with a pinch of salt, but he says the Russians started talking about the Sumy region during the negotiations. They demanded the creation of a security zone and threatened to annex the region. So if you put all of this together, this should be outrageously unrealistic, right? But does Trump understand that? Does he understand the geography enough? Does he understand what the Russians are demanding here? And does he have people like Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg to understand the situation well enough to say, no, Trump, the Russians are being ridiculous here? Now, the Ukrainian delegation head and Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov will apparently hold a press conference 6 o'clock Kiev time. So that is going to be in about an hour's time. So that's 4 o'clock UK time. As of now, the negotiations have ended and will likely not be continued. It lasted less than 2 hours. So no reports then went back. No, it's proper finished. Now, let's go across to Albania, where there's a European Political Community Summit. If it turns out that the Russian delegation is just a theatre, then the world must react, said Zelensky. Absolutely right. There must be a powerful reaction, including sanctions against the energy sector and banks. We must continue to increase pressure. Absolutely. And here, I think, is a super revealing picture. So you've got Tusk, Zelensky, Macron, Starmer and Merz. Again, those four with Zelensky showing united support there. That's good news. Now, today at the European Political Community Summit in Albania, captioned this image. I think that I like to see an image like that. No report says of those five that they had a phone call with Trump. Details will be released soon, according to Presidential Press Secretary Nikiforov. Excellent news, because they need to be talking to Trump, obviously, and they also need to be united in trying to convince Trump of the reality of on the ground here and what Russia is demanding and how ridiculous that is. Now, the Russian delegate Medinsky has agreed that each side will present its ceasefire vision. Oh, yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I said already. Oh, no, this is just the general feed, actually, because I need to know if there's anything else to add to this. Let me just survey the very latest. Yeah, nothing else to add other than both delegations are leaving Istanbul for their respective countries. That seems to be how it stands at the moment, judging by the scale of just let's go to Ilya Ponomarenko, former journalist for the Kyiv Independent, in a second, in reaction to Oliver Carroll again here, saying, have an inside view into the Russia-Ukraine talks from a well-placed source. This is from the Russian delegation head. Medinsky says it all. We don't want war. We're ready to fight for a year, 2, 3, however long it takes. We fought Sweden for 21 years. How long are you ready to fight? Medinsky, which I said already, Medinsky continued, and Peter the Great, you know who financed him? England and France. Sweden would still be a great power today if not for that. I'm told this rhetoric was not unusual in the discussions. So far, nothing has been agreed, not even prisoner exchanges. Update, I'm told that an exchange all the same is in the works, confirmed as 1,000 for 1,000. But it looks like the Russians were pretty bellicose in their approach to these conversations. Ilya Ponomarenko says, judging by the scale of the buffoonery and the disarmingly foolish bravado, astonishing even by the standards of Putin's diplomacy, Russia's situation in the war may be far less successful than they want us to believe. Yes, I think personally there is a chance that they have overplayed their hands, and I'm hoping that this will bring Trump around to Ukraine's point of view more so, but he's so unpredictable. I don't know. Yeah, Medinsky, a further comment from him, maybe some of those sitting here at this table will lose more of their loved ones. Russia is prepared to fight forever. I mean, yeah, okay, that is bravado and possibly what you'd expect from the Russians, but that shouldn't sit well with Trump. But again, you never can tell because he bends over backwards to accommodate Putin. And now we're starting to see comments from other leaders. So Starmer, super important here. Let's listen to him. Oh, damn it, they've dubbed him. So what he says, what we saw yesterday and last night is further proof that Putin is not serious about peace. He has fled. Ouch. It's crucial that we maintain full unity with our allies. We will continue working on this today. And to make it clear, there must be a ceasefire. But if not, we will act together on sanctions. Yes. So I presume there's not going to be a ceasefire. Ukraine won't agree to those demands. And it's then up to, I guess, Europe and Zelensky to convince Trump that Russia have walked away from the ceasefire. He needs to hold firm and hold true to the claims previously and come down heavily on Russia with swinging sanctions. That has to happen. So I guess my conclusion, as I've already said today, is I think Russia have overplayed their hands, but there's only one person that really matters when it comes to whether Russia have overplayed their hand or not, and that is Donald Trump. So we're going to wait to see what he says. Although it does sound like Europe are united in coming down on Russia in the event of no ceasefire being agreed, and I'm sure there won't be a ceasefire agreed. So will Europe diverge from the US? And I guess Europe might have some leverage with the US. They might say, right, we've given you every chance to allow for Russia to answer in a way that you want them to. They haven't. We are going to go hard on Ukraine. Are you with us or not? That could be what we might see tonight if the US decide not to, and that could force Trump into a position. And it might be that the Europeans are very savvy here and say, but you can be the one that leads this, Donald. You can be the one that says we are going to come down heavy on Russia, and we will back you up on that. You've got a choice. You either do that with us and we'll let you lead it and make you look like the strong winner, or we're going to have to diverge from you, and then you're in an uncomfortable position of not being on side with the rest of Europe when it comes to the approach to Ukraine and Russia. So interesting dynamics going on here, but yet again, all of that still does come down to what Trump says, although there is a chance that Europe could go it alone. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let me know what you think. These are dynamic times at the moment. Things may have changed by the time you've listened to this, and that may be only 20 minutes after I release it, because it's all happening. But anyway, take care, speak soon.